And with that, I guess we'll start with communications. I already did just hand out the beacon. That was the only communication that was in our box. So I guess I'll just ask if there's any communications from the committee. Not at this time.
Just a quick comment. I spent this past Saturday in Lunenburg, Vermont at their old homestay, and speaking with the locals there and the Historical Society, they struggle with the same issues as we do, and that is that volunteerism is not real high. When something happens, the entire town pulls together just like we do here, but when it comes to filling committees and stuff like that, they struggle with that also.
Speaking of which, yes, we still have a vacancy on our committee. So if anyone knows of anybody who might be interested or is interested, that would be great. If they want to just submit a talent bank form, that would be awesome, or get in touch with any member of the committee to ask questions. So then, all right, so that takes us, I don't see to have a public comment from. So unless, Karen, you have a comment as a member of the public?
I do not.
Okay. All right, so the next agenda item is just the request for joint meeting presentations follow-up. Now, at our last meeting, we had discussed, and I had followed up with an email that I sent out to Kate Burnham, and I realized that I hadn't copied you guys on it. When Peter was talking about it, I say, oh, I didn't see what you wrote. Nobody did, except for the people who were on the email. So I just sent that, I forwarded what I wrote. And what I wrote was basically the same thing that I had discussed at the last meeting, where it was, we would have a panel of board chairs to coordinate our members and have presentations from Adam Burney, hopefully, Heather, and Dr. Burnham, having to do with trends and issues that those trends are presenting, demographic information, things like that. Just for an informational presentation for us and for the town. I got a response back from the school committee chair asking for, basically just saying that they are prepared to move forward on scheduling the meeting. So I'm not sure that they're responding to the request to have the symposium instead of a meeting. So I'll follow back with Heather on that one. Because basically all she said was, we're all set on the school committee's end to move forward with scheduling a joint meeting. Please provide me with some dates so I can start to coordinate. And from what I saw of, and you saw it as well and you were there, at the Board of Selectmen meeting, they seem to be supportive of the notion of this type of presentation. Except for maybe Adam Burney, who was probably sitting at a table saying...
Completely surprised.
Yes, yes. Because basically, I hadn't included him in there because that was what that really was more whether or not the planning committee wanted to get involved and have him do that, or if Heather wanted to have, get him involved. So I I felt like I would be jumping steps to go to Adam. So, but they seem open to the idea. Nothing from the planning committee yet, but they haven't met, I don't think, since we did. So I will probably get back in touch with the school committee just to clarify what it is that we're looking for, because I thought I was clear in, and maybe I wasn't as clear in the email, but that my take on it was I didn't think that a meeting would be as helpful as just the gathering information.
I don't think there's going to be any objection from the school committee.
Okay.
So, I mean, I was at the meeting. It was not recorded. The superintendent explained the request and asked for the school committee to delegate her the authority to basically negotiate the date and format and that sort of thing. So it's in, my understanding is it's in her ballpark to figure out.
Which makes it interesting
that Heather responded. Yeah, but
so it should be Dr. Burnham. So I'll get in touch with her.
That's what I would recommend.
Okay, I will do that then. I also have not heard from Tom Alonso, although he did say that he was going to respond positively.
I think they're fully on board.
Okay.
And they did at the last second mention that we wanted to be a totally separate meeting.
Yeah.
So we might need to start picking some dates and
Right.
saying this is where we're thinking.
Right, yeah, actually, yeah, that was, I think one of Tom's favorite parts was that, we don't want it attached to anybody's business meeting. So, I'm sorry, John?
No, that's okay. I interjected. Prompted by Peter's memo regarding the joint meeting and the problem, the headwinds that the schools are experiencing, I did visit Adam Burney and dug down a little bit in some of the Hollis Hills project and the prospective Hollis Hills project, the prospective Howard Street project, and just to get an idea of a couple of things. First of all, the timing and the extent of those projects and what how they will likely affect school enrollment over time. So what I'd like to do is what I did is I put a summary together of what I found, and I actually shared that summary with Peter because he was the driving force on this. So if y'all would try to pass it along. I don't want to get in too much in detail with that. I just wanted to pass it out so we all sort of had a common understanding of some of the data that's driving this. And maybe in a subsequent meeting, we can use this to inform some of the discussions.
Yeah, no, that would be very helpful. And again, this is also part of what we're looking at being presented from the school's perspective, from the town services perspective, from everything. And quite frankly, and I know that this is just my opinion, but I wouldn't say that it's off the mark to consider this as a potential for looking at developing policy around growth. How to disseminate new growth.
Yeah. In fact, this sort of suggests a couple of approaches that had not occurred to me before. And
Maybe,
we can discuss that.
Right.
So a couple of thoughts on this. First of all, having not been here at the last meeting, but watched the tape for purposes of the minutes and just educating myself, I thought it was a really interesting interchange that you folks had with Mr. Rogers last week on this topic. And I think that it's not just development that is affecting things like school enrollment. We've got the Shirley phenomenon that we need to consider. The other thing that we need to consider in this town is just the demographics, right? So over the course of the last 10 years, as you've noted, our population over 60 has basically doubled. And what I interpret that to mean is that a lot of people in town who are today between the ages of 60 and 80 and probably educated their children in Lunenburg stayed in their homes. Baby boomers, that generation, and are beginning the process of downsizing. And because we have that population bubble that is perhaps more pronounced in Lunenburg because it was is still a nice sleeper community to raise a family. And enrollments, if you look at it in the 70s and 80s, were 1,800 plus. There's a demographic effect that's happening there that is not indicative of development. It's just economics. And I think that that's something that we also need to consider, and which is why people like Adam, I think, could potentially bring a lot to the discussion in his professional background.
Well, if I can add to that, Adam and I, part of the discussion Adam and I had was a dynamic that I was not aware of, which is a lot of my contemporaries, and I'm just going to be 70 shortly, are leaving their homes and harvesting the nest egg. And there's a favorable tax treatment on the capital gains. And so what we got is a rebound where the conjecture is that they're selling their homes to younger people who are likely to have children. But that would be an add that would tend to add to the school age population. But it's invisible from the standpoint of looking at new construction.
Exactly, right.
And so if you recall last meeting, I thought, geez, I can't square this up because there certainly is an increase, a noticeable increase in the schools, but there's not that much new construction, new residential construction when you compare it to the base of residential homes we have. But then you've got this undertow here from this transition, if in fact that's the case.
Yeah.
So.
And you also have, and the other thing is, I think where, Adam could perhaps bring some research at a state level to bear is the effects of different types of housing, 40B related, Emerald Place.
Sure.
Like we saw a spike last year that I think was largely generated from the development in Whalum that went online last year that we didn't see from Tri-Town Landing or Emerald Place. Right?
Absolutely.
Now, what does that mean relative to what's going to happen on the north side of town or in the Hollis Hills development? I have no idea. We don't know. We need help. And I hope that this discussion will bring not necessarily clarity, but more information to consider in that discussion. And I also want to harken back to, and this I don't think was really captured in your comments last week, Terry, but I do think that we need to keep mentioning that, at least from my perspective, one of the reasons for doing this is that the school department is our biggest budget item, per se, in the budget. We have policy directing budget in a lot of different directions in town, at a town level, selectman-driven policy. Best I can tell, the school department is not one of them. There's a lot of unfunded mandates that we need to fund as a town to run the school department, to include foundation level funding. But we haven't, as a town, recognized this is the level of performance we expect from the school department, this is the level of funding relative to other communities, and this is how we square that circle relative to the growth that we're projecting and that sort of thing. So I think personally, and I don't think it's going to come directly out of the meeting that we're going to have in October, but I think there's a policy outcome that we need to come to at some point relative to how we get to a school department budget. Today, as a new member of the finance committee, but as a citizen who's sat in a lot of town meetings and watched the process unfold on television, the school department budget is largely, in my mind, a function of whatever's left, or a budgeting process that goes on between the town manager and the superintendent that's unseen and ununderstood by me and the public at large. And one of my hopes for this year is that we can make that perhaps more visible, but also drive a little bit more direction, intention, and policy in that direction so that it can be more predictive in the future.
Right, and I think one of the other things that happened over time was that there stopped being a school department budget presentation at town meeting.
Yeah.
And that was the schools that opted not to do that. So, although at the last town meeting, I'm not sure.
Well, she spoke
Yeah.
quite a bit.
I'm also just trying to remember town meetings over time. And when the last time was that the numbers really showed up there in terms of what the goals and stuff were.
A number of years ago.
Sure.
I'd like to respond to one comment that was just made in regards to the school budget being more or less getting the leftovers from the budgetary process. I think as we get into this a little deeper and there's a little bit more knowledge of the overall picture, I think there'll be more understanding that it's not leftovers. Maybe the leftovers are pushed in that direction when push comes to shove at the end of the budget season, but I don't think the budgetary process up to that point is leftovers. I think it's a calculated dollar amount that the town can afford, and we need to be talking about how we afford what we need, because there's needs everywhere in this town, in every department, in every aspect of this town. And there are just so many dollars to go around based on our tax rate and tax base at this point. There's been resistance for decades to increasing taxes, and I don't know what the answer is. If the citizens of Lunenburg want the services that are reported to be needed by all departments, then the citizens of Lunenburg are going to have to pay for it. If they don't want to pay for it, then we have to pick and choose what those services are going to be that we can afford to pay for.
I do have to say, though, that I do agree that it would be nice to have some sense of what the town sees as the priorities for the school department. Well, you know, okay, so do we want to be, I mean, we have college focus, so is that one of the measurements? Or is one of the measurements, you know, MCAS testing, or is one of the, what are we measuring in terms of success?
And what does it take to get to that outcome?
Right, and so basically, from a town perspective, and it probably is in the 30-page report that the school department puts out, but it would be nice if there was an easier way to get some of the information out, and also have it not be an us versus them relationship, which sometimes is how it feels.
I agree with 99% of what Mr. Passios just said. I think where we disagree, or what I don't see, is the calculation that he referred to.
Right.
It's
Right, and you'd like to see where that is.
I'd like to see it.
Yeah, so, and that's understandable. It's like, you know, how do we get to that number? John?
My experience also is that every department seems to think of themselves as the recipient of the leftovers.
right.
Because
Perhaps, yeah.
we have 90% of the funds that everybody needs.
Right.
And so it's like, it's always an exercise of divvying up the shortfalls. And so everyone's right, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But there is that. We just don't have enough funding. Now, to Dave's point, we haven't had a general override for decades, as far as I can tell. We have, though, had, as recently as, 4 or 5 years ago, a debt exclusion override, and that passed fairly well, so fairly easily. So it's not that there's not an appetite for more tax. I think there's not an appetite for taxes that are, say, open-ended.
Well, I think it's easier to vote to increase your taxes for something that you can see,
Good point.
right? If I'm trying to raise money and I know that I can put pavement on a road or build a building, it's tangible.
Sure.
And operating budgets, although it requires an operating budget to maintain all those things that we build, are far less tangible in the eyes of the voter, and therefore a little bit harder sell, or maybe a lot harder sell.
And they're forever.
Right.
You
And that's a very good
establish
point, right?
a higher floor
It is
on which the
reestablishes the
subsequent
floor.
budgets are.
During the last attempt for an override, the real concern was the fact that, okay, it's targeted for 1 year, but after that, it just falls into the coffers and goes wherever the dollars drop in the budget. And that was a definite concern, and one of the things that shot it down.
Which is, again, why I think that if we can come up with some calculus that people can understand and build some some prediction around, I'm not choosing my words right, that it will make everybody more comfortable with a better understanding of where the dollars are not only going now, but where they're likely to go in the future relative to investments that we have decided to prioritize as a community.
Right, John?
In the municipal, going back to the operating budgets are forever, or overrides are forever. In the municipal finance glossary, there's a such thing as is an underride. An underride effectively unspools part of an override. So, you can sunset this if we had something that the town wanted to fund for a finite number of years. You could unwind it after that. I don't know what that scenario would be, but that may be a way to sell it.
I want to say that, that's probably one of those things that the only thing I can think of that there is an appetite to fund that way would be capital.
Yeah,
For land.
sure.
So I think, which actually then goes to the question of, in terms of the discussion of goal setting, is looking at, right now, a lot of the capital is funded through the free cash what's left of free cash, and then some funds from the operating budget.
Yep.
And then, like, should there be more discussion around how that goes?
Or selective borrowing.
Well, that's what I mean. So basically, so let's say that if we take capital out of the operating budget and
Sure.
then do the selective borrow, like basically either borrowing or the free cash, but then you run into that whole balance of what if we have a year where we don't have any free cash? And is that coming, given the fight going on between the Fed and everybody else? So, so it's there's a whole lot of, there's so many moving parts.
Yeah.
It's really kind of hard to predict, and I don't know how Karen does her job. So, it's basically, for the most part, budgeting is, like everybody's best guess about what's going to happen. So, but I do still think that we will pursue the joint presentations, and maybe what I'll do is also follow up more specifically with the planning board, just to see if they're the least bit interested in participating.
I think it'd be great to have them.
Burnham. Yeah, I
But-
think it would be.
But Adam, I think, is crucial.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm mostly just thinking in terms of from a planning perspective, because of their relationship to the master plan and the fact that Adam is doing stuff with them, then I didn't want to leave them out. So anyway, thank you for that information from Adam. That'll be something to check out and take another look at. I mean, as it is, I just because, like my mother's there, I am become aware of other people who are selling their homes and moving to places like Emerald Place, and to some of the apartment communities. Since we don't have senior housing, the closest thing is, people who might want to downsize and stay local, they're moving into apartment communities like that. All right, discussion of goals. I don't know if people had, certainly in the minutes, there was a good summary of some of the goal areas that Michelle had brought up in her opening public comment. I don't know if others had had a chance to send off to her any of the things that you felt that it would be good for us to focus on.
I haven't sent anything yet.
Okay?
Nope, nor have I.
Okay. Then we'll table that for the next meeting when she's here. But in the meantime, if you happen to give some thought to that and send her any information that you might want to have included in that discussion.
One of the possible goals that she raised, which I know has been raised by several members of this committee and members of the Board of Selectmen, is the definition of level services and level funding and that sort of thing. And I think we need to figure that out. I'm not quite sure how to get there. But I'm feeling a sense of urgency there, because I think that if we can come to a consensus on what those definitions are, potentially we can leverage those definitions during the budget process. I.e., if we would decide this is what level services is, this is what level funding is, this is some hybrid of level services where, like the school department, you've got to move stuff around due to shifting demographics or what have you, but it's the same level of services, just in different spaces, whatever we call that. We could set expectations going into the budget season that we're going to be anchoring our analysis to those definitions. And it will allow the town manager and the superintendent and the department heads to be thinking in those terms. Because I got the sense from watching last year that there was some confusion, even between the department heads. What was level services and what wasn't? Or did we have a shared definition? So I just want to raise that as a, like if we're going to make that a goal, it should be it should be something that we land on pretty quickly, because I think that, that's really good advice and that we can share with the professional leadership of the town well before they're getting into building budgets.
Okay, actually, that's a good point, and it brings me back, I think back on July 9th, I had sent an email to the Board of Selectmen through the chair, and I hadn't heard a response back, and part of what I was looking at was the service level committee revival, or, because we had discussed at that time the potential of having, like, different boards meet regularly, just to see what was coming down the pike, but I will forward that again. And I'll send that on to you folks too. I didn't CC you on that either, I'm sorry.
The way we land there may not necessitate multiple boards meeting.
Yeah, no, it probably won't.
It may take 6 or 7 members here agreeing to a definition.
Right.
And just kind of running with it and advising the other boards that this is what we want to do this year.
And
right?
I think and again, this is just my take on it, and then I think it's still worth a discussion, and maybe we'll just go ahead and put it on, I'll put it on an agenda down the road, but one of the issues that comes up is that level services, yeah, I mean, it's a tough one to come to, because the level services does not necessarily require additional staff. So, which is my take on it, one of the reasons why, I know it's great that we have planned for additional firefighters. But frankly, we could have hit the level services without increasing the positions. But it basically made it more consistent for the fire chief to be able to have additional positions that he could then fill, but it also created a ripple effect of, okay, so now we're paying more overtime, because if you need to fill a spot, you can't put in a day guy anymore, you got to put in somebody who's a full-time staff person at overtime. So, it just kind of rippled through the, which...
To that point, if I could interrupt for just a second, I'm hope that we analyze that situation and look at what the alternatives are than just saying, oh, well, it increased the overtime. In private industry, anything that creates a huge amount of overtime is covered by another body.
Yeah.
Rather than, I mean, you can afford, in many cases, you can afford a person and a half in the amount of overtime that you create in the process.
I think that's probably true in a lot of places where you're not also looking at OPEB liability down the road. So it's like, again,
I'm gonna
that's
have to be educated on that, because that is not my concern as much as it is getting the best bang for your buck within the budget.
Sure.
If it means hiring another person that will fill those overtime hours without creating overtime hours, then I see that as a win, even if there is a down the road cost.
Yeah, it would be interesting. It would be interesting to see, and maybe that's a discussion to have with the chief about, like, is there another way to do that? But contractually, it's just one of those, if there's a holiday.
I just don't know that it's ever been analyzed, that's all.
Yeah.
It's just a question to be asked, and, it may be, the information may show that it's not going to work.
And another approach is to look at comparable towns. Nothing that we encounter as a town is likely to be unique among the other comparable towns in this area. So maybe, Townsend or Shirley or Pepperell has done this a little different way and has solved the problem a little better. I don't know, but it's one way to approach it.
Does the Finance Committee have any input or role in collective bargaining?
No, and we had discussed this a long time ago about whether or not it would be possible and appropriate, maybe it would be good to bring it up again, to at least have a member be able to sit on the discussions. Whether or not they could participate is another question, but the fact that you're sitting there and, but yeah, it's never been identified as.
It just seems like there's a lot of ramifications to collective bargaining that,
Yep.
you take collective bargaining and you take policy, and now all of a sudden you've got massive budget ramifications that, from our level, are way outside of our purview, but yet we're responsible for the finances to a certain degree, right? So.
And they end up, sometimes collective bargaining ends up driving too much of a cost increase year to year, which
Right.
2.5% plus new growth can't cover.
Right.
And then we end up having to divvy that much, that much less.
Yeah, and I'm not
funds.
even thinking just, I mean, that's a salary example.
Yeah.
Right.
The example that he raised is, it's really language. That's policy that's driving, why an additional full-time position is driving additional overtime.
Yeah, yeah.
It's counterintuitive, but yet that's the language of the
Yeah,
contract,
sure.
right? So,
Exactly.
Yep.
Right, and there's overtime attached every time there's a holiday. So, you already know that, and that's typically when they're covering the overtime, because there are shifts that are covered by people who are not full-time employees that don't require overtime, so. But, it's basically part of the reason for that was looking at the demographics of an aging population and the increase in the number of calls that were going out.
Yep.
Which required an additional ambulance, which required, so it's, everything has a, level service is an interesting question, and we should probably give it a go. And what do we mean by that among ourselves? So
it could also be a really interesting conversation as we get into our, hopeful fireside chats with the department heads that are going to be
Right.
ahead of the budget, right? Like I think it's a good opportunity to kind of have that discussion at a high level before we're into the nuts and bolts of but if we've got a pretty good idea what that definition is prior to that discussion, it'll make it a whole lot more efficient.
Right, and if they have it too, then that would be helpful too. So I think, unfortunately, and although we could have this discussion with Karen, but it would probably be easier to have this discussion with Heather, and unfortunately I don't think she's available for the August 22nd meeting either.
I think I think it was this meeting and the next meeting that she wasn't going to.
Right, she was on, I don't know why people think they get vacations, but it's cutting into my time. All right, so that'll be a good one to have a discussion around, and we'll include that separate from the other, some of the other goals I think will be a lot easier to get at, especially around the webpage.
The webpage was updated this week, I noticed.
But I don't think that, I was like,
Just the names. are
yeah,
updated,
I was going to
names
say,
and terms.
the right names are up there, then that's helpful. It's current. But we've talked about for a long time getting the glossary up, and we've
Yeah.
talked a long time about getting some other stuff up that we should probably just go ahead and set a goal to get that done this fall. Okay. Basically, at the last meeting, the other thing that did come up was, did talk to Heather about doing the budget process, scheduling her to do a talk on that, and she'll do that. I think did we decide that September? Did we? I'm trying to remember now if we talked
I
dates.
think we may have, because she wasn't going to be available for this meeting and the August meeting, that it would make the most sense to try to do it then, because we didn't want to wait till October.
Right, okay, so I'll just check in with her and see if that's, so I was thinking I didn't notice that the minutes reflected a timeline.
The minutes said September or October.
Thank you.
And I
Okay.
believe that was what was just, we didn't nail down September, but I think the
Okay.
intent was for that meeting to occur prior to the symposium.
Yeah.
So, sort of the order would be, we'd have that discussion with Heather, kind of have our understanding of what the budgetary game plan is, then go in, do the information collecting,
Yep.
and then, get into, as we get closer and closer into budget season, we'll
Okay,
have that knowledge.
that sounds good. So we'll go back to her for that. All right, do we have any committee department updates or from any other committees? You did.
Yes, the school committee had a meeting last Wednesday, which if I recall correctly was the 30th or 31st of July. It was a meeting that was not previously scheduled. It was posted, and there was an email that went out to parents to advise them of the meeting, and it was specifically called for the purpose of addressing some policy issues around elementary school busing. And the superintendent proposed a new policy which requires that elementary age students are met by a parent or older sibling when they get off the bus. And that they're effectively not allowed to get off the bus if they do not have that parent or older sibling there. Parents of 5th grade students are able to give permission for their student to get off the bus unattended. So it's basically a policy of K through 4, but the parent of the 5th grader needs to be proactive and fill out a permission slip. At the same time, the walkers policy was also addressed to basically to mimic that. So effectively now, only students in grade 5 with parental permission are allowed to walk home unattended. And this spun out of other policy changes that were made earlier in the year relative to the extended day program. This is just for information only purposes. I don't think that there's going to be any budgetary effect on these policy changes unless there is such an outcome in terms of busing usage that it may require some sort of modification, and that has not been discussed by the school committee, but you can almost see an unintended consequence potentially based on the usage of the busing. TBD. However, it was a regular school committee meeting, and there was a superintendent's report at which she reported that they have not seen any spikes in enrollment as of July 24th. So the concerns that she had voiced during the budgetary season, particularly about the primary grades and perhaps the need to add an additional kindergarten or first grade teacher, does not seem to be in the cards as of the 24th of July. There have accepted 9 students into the school choice program this summer, 8 in grade 9 and 1 in grade 10. We do not have school choice out numbers, or at least they were not discussed. The other issue that could potentially have some down the road budgetary effect, I wound up asking the question during public comment at the end. There's been some water testing in the schools over the summer. They do it on a regular basis. And there have been some findings this summer about lead and copper levels in the school department water. There will be a communication apparently going out to parents about that and about any remediation. It's sort of in process. They don't exactly know what the remediation will be or could be, but that's a potential issue that we will, I think, want to stay abreast of. School starts on August 27th. There was also a food service audit completed this summer. And school lunches will be $3 per day across the board this year. In previous years, there were different levels at elementary versus middle high school. It's being leveled to $3 across the system. There have been 2 new secretaries that have been hired in the school department over the course of the last several weeks. She also announced one retirement, I believe it was of a paraprofessional, and a couple of resignations. I asked the question as to the personnel changes as well as the potential, water issues. If we will at some point see a budgetary update in terms of dollars in and out relative to the changes that have occurred over the summer. And I did not receive a response, but I'm hopeful that the superintendent, either at a school committee meeting or through some correspondence with us, is able to give us an update at some point in the not-too-distant future. I know that last year there were a number of retirements that were announced during the summer, and Mr. Rogers called attention to that, basically looking for clarity as to where those dollars went. If you've got a retiring teacher, you hire a new teacher, there's a cost savings according, in what happens there. I don't get the sense that the numbers will be as substantial as they were last year in that direction, but I personally think that it's an issue that deserves transparency, and we should keep an eye on that.
John?
Oh, a couple of things. First of all, on the school busing, is there a possibility that they'll need more after-school care if enough kids don't get picked up, don't get greeted by parents or orders?
Yeah, so this was a very contentious meeting, as you might imagine.
Sure.
And the meeting actually followed other contentious meetings about the extended day program and it being reconfigured. And the reconfiguration of the extended day program is basically moving that program from the primary and elementary school back to TC Passios. The school department is renting classroom space from the town to run that program now, but it is capped at 100 students. And right now, registrations, at least as of last week, we're about bumping up at that number. A couple of days were full and in the afternoon. And so it's not clear if there will be a downstream effect on any other services or whether there will need to be additional changes made. It's just not clear. And unfortunately, there really isn't a lot of raw data that was collected prior to these decisions being made about what families would do in a variety of different circumstances. And so, fortunately, those issues were raised but not resolved. And at this point, I think that the first couple of weeks of school may be telling.
So my understanding is they cap it at 100 kids, and they do have in the budget provision to have staff on hand to handle 100 kids.
That shouldn't be part of the school budget.
It's controlled by the school department, but it's an enterprise fund.
Right, it's
Oh,
separate from.
Self-funding,
Right.
revolving,
Okay,
or a revolving
So
account.
it really shouldn't affect
It should not have any bearing on
their budget.
On their budget.
Going forward.
No,
Okay.
no. It could have some bearing on space needs or those kinds of issues, but that's run basically as a self-funding enterprise account. And one of the reasons why they made the changes was that there have been some structural issues with that program. And, I believe there may be $250,000, $300,000 in that account. But that account, I believe, over the course of the last few years has decreased. So they're operating, I believe, at a slight structural deficit.
Yeah.
And we're running into staffing problems and a lot of other issues, which led the superintendent to make the changes to the program, basically to strengthen it.
Okay.
But because of that, there have been some downstream effects on families that have been difficult.
Good. Any other updates?
That's it.
I just wanted to ask a question. That the busing thing, the K through 4, where they're not going to let the kid off the bus, how many students does that affect? How many is K through 4?
I don't know.
Actually, is that a change? Have they been letting them off the bus already?
They have. So, and this is
Actually, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on.
Basically, the superintendent has characterized it as a miscommunication amongst the administration. But basically, the practice that was communicated by the elementary school principal over the last few years has been, an arrangement between the bus driver and the parent. And so it does represent a change in practice. But that practice, according to the superintendent, was not in conformance with the official town policy.
Got it. Okay, so okay. Okay. All right, so then that's, I don't have any updates from anybody, so, then we can just move right along to minutes. Did everybody review the minutes?
I did.
Yep.
Everybody happy with the minutes?
Yeah.
Is anybody happy enough to make a motion to accept the minutes?
Make a motion to accept the minutes as crafted by Mr. Beerborn.
Do I have a second? For July
July
25th?
25th. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Great job, thanks.
Thank you.
Town manager, financial officer reports, do we have any?
We do not.
Okay, then I'm just going to ask you to clarify just one time for the whole discussion on, that's been ongoing about the, I know, and we probably will. We'll see if she refuses to get up. The whole discussion around the Chapter 70.
That was going to be my public comment.
Can you just speak to what the number actually ended up being? Because I know that there were some people who had a question around how that played out. But could you do it from up here so you can be on mic? Since you know, like, there are people who are referring people to you, I figured I'd just let you answer it here.
And where do you want me?
Wherever there's a mic.
Mic right there.
Come on over.
I'll come over here. Okay. I know that you received an email from Heather letting you know what the overall difference was in the cherry sheet from what she had originally estimated, which was the governor's proposal when we went to town meeting versus the final cherry sheet. Based upon the final cherry sheet versus the estimated, there was an increase in Chapter 70 funding of $32,622. I can go down these one by one and then you'll see what the differences are. There was an increase in our charter school tuition reimbursement of $10,707. There was an increase in our smart growth reimbursement, which is the money for Tri-Town,
Right.
correct, of $17,686. There was a decrease in school choice receiving tuition of $4,088. There was an increase in state-owned land of $1,161, and an increase in the public library's funding of $483. So the total increase on the cherry sheet on the revenue side was $58,571.
Karen, that number is relative to last year or relative to the budget?
Relative to the budget.
Relative to the budget, yes. Yeah, no.
Can you share that via email with me, just for
I
minutes?
certainly,
Okay.
yeah. And you'll be able to see, too, what the increase was, because one of the things when you were talking about the school department budget that I looked at was the difference between the final cherry sheet, Chapter 70 funding versus what we had in 2019. So there was an increase from 19 to 20 in Chapter 70 funding of $233,000.
Okay.
But, I mean, we had accounted for 202,000 of that when we set the budget. So that's on the revenue side. But then on the assessment side, we had the overall assessments increased $69,991. And the majority of that increase was related to school choice sending tuition. That increased from our estimate. We had an estimate of $438,986. The actual number came in at $513,306. So there was an increase there of $74,320. There was a slight decrease in the charter school sending tuition of $6,189. So school choice and charter assessments increased $68,131.
So we're net negative.
So overall, with everything that happened, there was a reduction in overall revenue and assessments of $7,815.
What was that number again?
$7,815.
Questions for Karen?
One of the other things that I'll say while I'm sitting up here is that the MSBA audit for the middle school, high school project, the hearing on the MSBA level for the closeout of the project should happen in October. Hopefully, we will have final numbers from MSBA, I would think, hopefully a month before that, so that we can review, because what happens is they'll send us something that will have what they calculated for what the total costs are, what their total share is, what our total share is, and if we're in agreement with that, we ship it back to them, and then when they meet in October, shortly after that meeting, we should receive the final payment from them and be able to issue the final bond. So that will happen hopefully soon. It's only been a few years.
No, the timing's good, though. I mean, if you look at the interest rates, the timing's good.
No, it's
Hopefully,
good.
yeah.
So, and right now, we have like a $2.1 million ban on that project that we've been rolling over for a few years. And so what we're looking to do is probably renew the ban until January of 2020, and then issue the final bond at that time with the fire truck that we also, because that was, I mean, that's taking forever too. That's been like a 2-year build-out for that thing, so. And John, there was no, when we had the conversation about the borrowing, I was talking about the borrowing from the last town meeting, but there wasn't any authorized, so. The only things that are pending right now that are just temporarily financed right now and will be bonded is the fire truck and the school project.
I just have a question on the resolution of the ins and outs of assessments in Chapter 70, and that I assume that those numbers sort of get balanced with the article that'll come out of the special town meeting, I would imagine, right? Is that do those accounts get resolved that way, or is that a different?
Well, right
Very
now,
different way.
well,
Yeah.
I mean, you know how we do the summary page, and I'll, when I send this to you, I'll send you the whole thing so you can see the summary page and everything, but one of the things is the cherry sheet revenue and the assessments. I mean, you're voting on those when you're voting the overall budget, because it's part of our raise and
Right.
appropriate, but those go directly on the recap. I mean, they're actually, if you brought up the file on the Department of Revenue website, those numbers are there now, so, the $7,815 that we're short, you have the ability through, like, adjustments
Yeah,
to
yeah.
local receipts
Sure.
or
Yeah, yeah.
something like that, to zero that out, and you wouldn't even have to take it to town meeting,
Okay.
because you can balance the budget that way. But the other piece of it that we're waiting for from the Board of Assessors is our growth numbers.
Right.
Because over the last, at least, probably 3 or 4 years, I would say, there's been excess over what we had anticipated, so we're waiting for that. So between this and the new growth, hopefully there will be a surplus that will have to be appropriated at town meeting.
What's the timing for the assessors to report on new growth?
Well, they should have, I mean, I guess I'm not sure why it takes so long, because it's based on everything. I believe the cutoff date is July 1st. So, I mean, typically, we've been getting those numbers, or the certified growth numbers, because you can't do anything with it until the Department of Revenue certifies it. But typically, the time frame that we've been seeing is probably mid-November, early November, that we get our certified growth. So, I mean, there's been times that we've even had a special town meeting and haven't
Before
had
that.
that number certified yet.
But
so.
you'll have a pretty good idea prior to the certification. Yeah.
Right, but you want it certified before you have a special town meeting, because you can't do anything
Well,
with
you
it.
want it certified, because
Right.
if you went in and appropriated dollars, and then the Department of Revenue said to the assessors, no, these values aren't right, or whatever, then you've appropriated something that you don't have.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so hopefully, I would hope that we could get it early October by the latest, but
That would be nice.
we'll push the assessors and try to get them.
All right.
But there's no need for a special town meeting unless we have those numbers set at this point?
Well, I mean, based on what happened with the cherry sheet, I
Yeah.
would say no, but if we had significant growth, then
Maybe, right.
maybe.
Okay.
And
And
I
then the
would
other
think-
follow-up question that I have is from previously, we had talked about trying to get a breakdown of how much of the new growth is actual construction and how much of it
And we've
is
tried and tried and
improvements.
tried to get that information
Okay.
for you to no avail.
Is
as
there,
of-
where would be the best place to get it, through the assessor?
It has to come through
From
the Board of Assessors. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I'll reach out to the Board of Assessors and ask for that breakdown. I'm just curious, how much is decks and,
With the earmarks offsetting projects that were budgeted in 2020, we'll have money that is going to have to be reappropriated anyway, isn't there?
I don't think any of those.
Well,
That's right.
three, I mean, I know there was the one for the DPW for the 165, but the $40,000 for the Eagle House Senior Center, that wasn't part of the capital plan. The handicap ramp wasn't part of the capital plan, and there was one more. What was
Do
the
those
other
have to
one?
be appropriated or not?
No, they'll come in the form of a grant from the state. So, I mean, it's set up and spent on that specific purpose, so.
Yeah, there was one other project.
Yeah, I can't remember what the other one was.
HVAC at the Eagle House.
No,
We had the HVAC at the Eagle
Handicap
House, the
ramp
handicap
now.
ramp, the DPW, tanks.
Self-contained breathing apparatus for fire
oh, breathing apparatus for the fire
Right,
department,
right,
that's not on
right. So, and that wasn't part of it. The only
So-
one that was the tanks.
Yeah.
DPW.
So if anything, we would just, whatever wasn't used for that, we could reallocate, because the funding source for that, I believe, I think all of it was either raise and appropriate
It
or
was.
free cash, so
It was.
it would be available for appropriation,
Okay.
once we know for certain what that project's gonna cost, and
So we've potentially already got some numbers that are going to need to be adjusted in the meeting before sometime late in the fall or early winter,
Potentially,
potentially.
yeah.
well, potentially, but yeah, definitely. I mean,
don't, then
because
don't.
if we knew, like, say, the tanks, we have the 330,000, if we knew the tanks were 330 and 165 was coming from the state, then that 165 is available for.
But
Right.
if we don't meet, that basically becomes free cash.
Well, no, it won't be, it wouldn't be free cash because it's been appropriated now, so it wouldn't become free cash until the
Oh,
following.
yeah, no, I understand that, yeah.
Right.
Which is why you might want to have a meeting, if anything, just to appropriate it.
To build it into the budget instead
Right.
of it spilling over. There's pros and cons to that, though.
Right, well, the other thing
spillover
is that,
can help you in the next fiscal year, too.
right, because you still wanted to keep it limited to capital, because as soon as you throw it in the operating budget, you've
Yeah, and I think
shot
that's been the
yourself.
policy.
Right.
If there's been any offsetting funds coming,
Yep.
revenues coming in to offset capital, it stays as capital.
Reallocated to
Yep.
capital.
Yep.
Yep.
And I'm trying to think if there was anything else while I'm sitting here. Well, you got me, I was just trying to hit everything I could think of.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I do appreciate it.
One very serious concern I have about what's transpired in the last few weeks is that information was disseminated through the local newspaper that was totally out of context to the real story. Now, we've got hundreds of people out here in the town that have read the newspaper article and say, oh, we got $230,000 more from the state in Chapter 70 funds. So that's what they're gonna walk into town meeting thinking.
Well, and I
And-
think,
And now we've got to undo all of that with the information in perspective and know that it's not there. That tends to be what happens with the budget, or has happened in the past, I'm sorry, is that, information gets out there that isn't fully vetted, And that's what people walk into town meeting with, because they're not all on social media.
Right.
They read the newspaper once, they don't see the correction on social media. So there's all these conflicting numbers that are always floating around.
Right, and actually, I mean, that's time immemorial. I mean, basically that I know I've been misquoted in the Sentinel, and I mean, you know, like basically everybody is misquoted in the
But it's
Sentinel.
not just misquoting.
I think there's a way to
There's a
put it
need
out.
to be more precise and probably a little
But
bit.
I think what happened was the information came out of Senator Tran's office.
Right.
And since the information came out of Senator Tran's office, saying, okay, we got $233,000 more, it wasn't clear that that was based on last year's number, but
Right.
our budget took into account 200,000 already.
Right.
So that's the piece that was missing,
Right.
is that you can't control what everybody's saying, and it's,
But, to Dave's point, the email that we got from the town manager was ambiguous on that point. The superintendent of schools briefed that, actually, just the Chapter 70 portion, at the school committee meeting, and characterized it as money going back to the town. We need to be a lot more precise, I believe, in our language when we talk about these things. And they're
Sure.
complex topics.
Right.
But we have to add that context because people don't know unless they're told.
right, and it could also just be that, basically when something does show up in the Sentinel like that, having some kind of a response from the town that clarifies the information in the Sentinel, because if that's where they're seeing the information, then that's where the correction maybe needs to go.
Well,
So,
Dave Rogers came in to see me right away when he saw that
Yeah, really, I can't
230. He's
believe
like,
that.
what's going to happen with that 233,000? I said, no.
no, I will say that I did see it posted, and my first response was, well, unless it's more than 7.7 million, it's already spoken for. That was already in, so.
Yeah, no, I actually went into the budget,
Yeah.
pulled out those numbers, and actually interestingly came up with that $7,000, but
Yep.
it was a little bit laborious to figure that out.
It is, yes.
Well, and it's hard because the assessments and the offsets, which are the choice receiving and the public library money, they're on the revenue side, but then they're taken out on the other side, so. The net of everything was that negative, the deficit of 7815, so. Not too
I
bad.
didn't come
Could
to
have
that
been a
precise
lot
number.
worse.
I was a little off.
You're a little off, okay. All right, well, if we don't have anything more for Karen, then we'll stop with that. Thank you for clarifying that. And with that, we'll just move on to, is there anybody on the committee that has a public comment?
I've got a quick one if nobody else does. And this is, as a citizen of Lunenburg, a parent whose two kids went through the school system and were bused home. I just caution the parents in complaining about the new policy. I can't give all the details to it now because it's too long a story, and there's really nobody to blame that it happened. But if you have your child dropped off at your home when you're not there, and she walks by two B&E people coming out of that home, you'll be concerned as to why they were dropped off. And, I've been there and I've lived that.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Any public comment from the public? No. Okay. Having no public comment, other public comment, our next meeting is August 22nd. I'll try to, I think probably we'll put on that one, we'll have the goal discussion, and I think we'll have a discussion around, do you want to start to have the service level or the level service discussion without Heather, or do you want to wait until Heather's back?
I think we can start the conversation.
Okay.
I will not be here on the 22nd.
Oh,
That's, doesn't mean that we can't start the discussion, it just won't be with me.
You got vacation too?
Actually, it's difficult to call it vacation because I've been tired, so I don't know what the heck I'm doing. But I won't be here.
you won't
It's
be
a
here.
focused
Okay.
vacation.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think we just get started on it and go as far as we can with
Yeah.
it.
sure.
I mean, that can be a work in progress for, a number of meetings.
Sounds good. And then.
Can we-
I'm sorry.
Can we get the ball rolling on the department head invites? Is that something that has to wait for Heather to come back to get that going?
Is she
or-
back next week?
She's here next week.
All right, yeah, I'll just ask her about that.
I'd just rather that not wait until it's too late.
Yep.
Like the calendar will get away from us.
When does the chief retire?
Jimmy?
Yep,
The end of this year.
the end of,
The
so
end of the
June.
fiscal year, yeah.
Okay. All right. I just figured I'd ask in case there was somebody else who was going to be coming through for the budget discussions. Because he seemed to indicate that he didn't have to do them anymore.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought his contract ran through the end of this fiscal year.
I think he just kept saying that, at some point, we were going to have to throw him out. So,
Yeah.
and that's why he brought the banana bread. So, all right, so then, after that, we'll be meeting on September 12th, unless anybody is not going to be around and, wants a week off. Hearing nobody, I'm going to assume that we're going to be meeting that night, and with that, and no other business on the agenda, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Save as.
Yeah, thank you. Mind if I take this one?
Oh, absolutely.